I live in a house in the suburbs of Oregon City. I originally moved here with my fiancé following a promotion at work. We figured it was time to stop living in separate apartments and attempt to settle down. After a rough year, we finally split. It was more than we were both ready for. It's... whatever. When we first moved in, things were hectic with the fiancé and work and everything in my life. Katie and I were both constantly stressed. I was working long hours, she was finishing nursing school. We fought a lot. We argued about everything. Something had to break. Now, it's just me and my 6-year-old golden retriever named Murphy. The house immediately felt different when Katie left. Of course, her personal things went with her when she packed up and moved on, but it was more than just her stuff. In this case, strange things began to crop up after she left. At first, I noticed little details here and there. Things out of place. They stood out enough to be notable. For example, after Katie left, the plants in my garden started to die, one by one. Sure, I don't spend all day tending to the plants, but still, I watered them every morning. It wasn't a big deal, just weird. Another time, I came home from work and all the electronics in my house were unplugged. Again, weird. I would sometimes see or hear things in the house that didn't make a lot of sense. Once, while I was cooking dinner, I heard something whistling in the garage. Just a casual tune. Or at least that's what it sounded like. I went out there and the garage was empty. Not a soul in sight. Sometimes at night, the furnace turned on or off without warning. Doors would even creak shut in the middle of the night. Things went missing, too. I was reading a book for a while, which I would always leave on the nightstand next to my bed. One morning, when I woke up, it was gone. At the time, I thought Murphy might have dragged it off somewhere, but I never did find the book. My family told me I was under too much stress. They said I was imagining things. You need to go on a vacation, my dad told me one day over the phone. Get out of that house for a couple weeks. It would do you good. I remember agreeing with the sentiment at the time. But what I didn't divulge was that my work was ramping up and I just didn't have the time for a vacation. They needed me on the floor. My PTO was stacked up and I rattled around inside the house. At least I had Murphy and I was thankful for that. Over time, I started getting used to little things happening here and there around the house. Harmless things. At first, I thought it was neighborhood kids pulling pranks, but the duration and frequency of the events pretty much ruled that out. It just didn't add up. I started to think my house was haunted. And then, my dog started acting strange. That's when things took a turn for the worse. That's when things took a turn for the worse. One night, I was getting ready for bed. Per the usual, I made my rounds, turning off lights and making sure all the doors were locked. I was heading for my bedroom when I realized I hadn't seen Murphy in a while, which was weird. He was usually pretty close by. I whistled lightly. No response. I passed through the kitchen and there he was, staring into the open door to the garage. The lights inside the garage were out. Murph just stood there, staring into the darkness. Even when I touched his head, he didn't budge. It was unsettling. Then, a few months ago, I was playing around on YouTube, and after turning off the TV, I heard Murphy quietly whimpering in the kitchen. This surprised me, so I went to check on him. He was running back and forth in the kitchen with this hunched-over posture. It wasn't like him to act like this. He was behaving like he'd been scolded or attacked. I called his name, but he didn't respond. When I took a knee and tried to hug him, he just kept walking right over me and knocking me on my back. And then he threw up, right in my face. I took him to the vet the next day, and he received a clean bill of health. Nothing to worry about, the vet told me. Murphy is a healthy, middle-aged dog. These things happen sometimes. The vet also said that my dog might be stressed, and dogs can act weird under stress. I just don't know what could be stressing him out. That weekend, Murph and I took a trip to the coast, a needed change of scenery. Despite it being early September, the weather was warm and dry. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, and the stresses of work in the house seemed to fade away as I watched Murph darting up and down the sand, chasing my frisbee excitedly. One wild throw and he plunged into the water, briskly swimming with his chin up in the air. I laughed as he shook right off next to me, throwing salty seawater into my face. We shared a sandwich on the windy hiking trails of Cascade Head. We spent the night camping near Lincoln City. That night, as I sat in my folding chair, looking up at the stars, Murphy nuzzled his head beneath my hand. The dog I knew and loved was back. The next day, we headed home. We got back from the coast on Sunday evening. When I entered the house, something immediately felt wrong. I stopped in the entrance just outside the front door and looked around. Nothing looked amiss. I threw my shoes into the basket behind the door and walked into the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Murphy running down the hallway towards my bedroom on the other side of the house, his paws clicking rapidly on the hardwood. What's he running to? I wondered. And then I realized my kitchen chairs were all pushed over into one corner. That constricting feeling of dread began to grip my chest like slender, bony hands. I turned on my heels and jogged towards the hallway, afraid of what I might find. As I rounded the corner, I slid to a stop in my socks. Murphy was at the other end of the hallway, staring into my room. He was silent, but alert, his tail straight up like a radio antenna. I slapped my thigh, calling out to him, but he didn't budge. He was transfixed on the empty room. After a few moments of silence watching Murph frozen there, I walked up and scratched behind his ear. Normally he would put his head up in satisfaction, but this time he didn't move an inch. A question ran through my head over and over again. What does he see? I decided to search my entire property just to be safe, and I couldn't find anything else out of place. I searched the backyard, the garage, and even peeked in the attic. Nothing unusual. Just the chairs. I didn't leave them like that. Had someone been in my house? And Murph, he just kept acting strange, staring into empty space like some bizarre canine sentinel. What does he see? That night I spent several hours on the internet researching dog behaviors. You know, the internet has a way of answering your questions in 100 different ways. Your dog might be having seizures, said one site. It's probably stress. Get a dog-appeasing pheromone diffuser, said a different site. Another site suggested, give your dog a teaspoon of yogurt for his digestive bacteria. Finally, I found, dogs know when something bad is going to happen. Feeling flustered, I decided to stop researching dog behaviors for a while. I combed through real estate listings for houses in my area. I wasn't sure what I planned to do. If things got bad enough, maybe the only option would be to move. I really didn't want to move. Over the next month, I decided to dedicate my focus on work. I stayed for overtime when I could and put in long hours. The paychecks were great, and I was sufficiently distracted. Murphy seemed to be normal most of the time, even though he occasionally attached himself to an empty room, staring into space like he was entranced. Sometimes I found ways to snap him out of it. Other times, he'd be frozen there for hours. Then, a week later, a noise woke me up in the middle of the night. It sounded like a chair clattering to the floor in the kitchen. I jerked awake, flooded with adrenaline. My bedside clock read 2 or 3 a.m. I don't exactly remember the time. I looked around the room, disoriented. The only light was a slice of moonlight coming through the space between my bedroom curtains. When my eyes focused a little better, I was startled to see Murphy, planted in the entrance to my room, facing me. Just the front half of his body was lit by the moonlight. He was staring directly at me. He was standing perfectly still, like a statue. His eyes were locked with mine, and his lips were curled back a little, showing his teeth in a twisted smile. I could do nothing but just stare back at him. His chest heaved gently with every breath. After what seemed like an eternity, he turned around unnaturally slowly and glided silently out of the room. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen, turning on the lights. Sure enough, one of the chairs was knocked over to the floor. This time the chair was in front of the sink, on the other side of the room. It was either taken there by someone or thrown there. Murph may have knocked it over, but he would have needed to carry it around the kitchen island to get it there. Look, I know what you're thinking. Murphy needs to see a veterinarian. Something's wrong with my dog and he needs help. Well, rest assured, I share the sentiment. The next day, I took him back to the vet. They ran a slew of tests beginning with cognitive reflexes and ending with blood work. They even asked if they could keep him overnight for some sleep monitoring. I wholeheartedly agreed. I just wanted my buddy back. As I drove away from the vet's office, I already felt some satisfaction that things were going to be better. That night, I slept better than I had in a long time. The next day was another story. It was nearly impossible to concentrate at work. The more I thought about Murph and what had been happening, the more my imagination conjured unpleasant outcomes. I'm an operations manager for a software company, so I have a staff that relies on me to be present and attentive. I found myself glancing at the clock every 5 minutes and spent all my breaks repeatedly checking my phone. I kept expecting a voicemail saying my dog was going to die or had some rare canine disease, but I didn't hear a thing. Regardless, I felt sick all day. During lunch, I heated up a Tupperware of leftovers in the microwave. When I pulled the food out, I nearly threw up from the smell. It wasn't spoiled. I just couldn't eat. So, into the garbage can went my day-old mashed potatoes and broccoli. Finally, I got off work around 3 p.m. and sprinted to my car. I headed to the vet's office to pick up Murphy. When I arrived at the office, the receptionist shot me a troubled look. She looked as stressed as I felt. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here for my dog, Murphy," I told her wearily. "I left him here yesterday for some tests." And when the name Murphy escaped my lips, her look of stress became a look of horror. I watched her as she turned and walked over to an older man in orange scrubs. She said something to him in a hushed tone, getting very close to his face. The man then looked over to me, his brow furrowed. What is it?" I asked nervously. He motioned for me to follow him. A flutter of anxiety crept through my body as I prepared myself to hear that my dog was dead. I was sure this would be the news I was about to receive. I followed the man into a small room with 2 chairs and a small table. Nothing else. He shut the door once I was seated. "Look, I'm sorry for this, but I needed to make sure we could talk privately about what's happening here," the man started. "And what exactly is happening here?" I said a little more frantically than I intended. Well, Murphy disappeared this afternoon, about an hour ago," the vet said slowly. "He was here all night. We monitored his sleep patterns, and then today, when we were preparing him for discharge, he was left alone for about 10 minutes. When we returned, he was, well, gone." My stomach twisted into knots. "He's gone?" I managed to choke out. "We've searched the building and the surrounding area. We're so sorry," the vet said as his bushy gray eyebrows pinched his forehead together. This has never happened before." I didn't stay to let him finish. I stood up and left the small room, heading for the exit. A younger vet in white scrubs whirled around when he saw me approaching the waiting room. He stood directly in my path and asked me to stop, but I shoved him aside. His back hit the wall with a thud. The startled receptionist ran to his side. I jogged up to my car and sped off towards my house. Thankfully, I live close to the vet's office, and it only took me 10 minutes to get home. What did I expect to find at my house? Well, to be completely honest, I'm not sure what I expected. My head was spinning and it was hard to think. I wanted to collect my thoughts and formulate a plan to find Murphy. When I arrived home, I immediately headed into the kitchen. Slamming a small glass on the counter, I poured myself a whiskey. My hand trembled as I raised the glass to my lips. After a few seconds deep in thought, it hit me like a bag of rocks. Murph's collar had a GPS tracker built in. Katie bought it when she moved in. I remember telling her at the time that it was a waste of money. Seriously, we used to call him Velcro because he wouldn't leave my side. I never used the collar before, so I had to download the tracker app to my phone. After a few minutes, I entered my information and the app loaded. Then it showed a blip on the map. The blip was on my house. No, that had to be wrong, I thought, and reloaded the app. Again, it showed the blip steadily on my house. I called out to Murphy, voice echoing through the empty rooms. I searched my house from top to bottom. My dog was nowhere in sight. I grabbed a flashlight and headlamp and headed outside. It was just getting dark as I scouted my half-acre backyard. My voice cut through the cold air as I called out for Murphy. I searched behind my shed, under the deck, and around the sides of the house. I got down on my hands and knees and looked into the crawlspace vents cut into the foundation of the house. And finally, something caught my eye. I could see a tuft of fur just at a view from one crawlspace vent next to my driveway. It was Murphy's fur color. My hands trembled as I pulled the wooden cover off the crawlspace entrance next to my deck. The opening was only about 1.5 feet high. I tightened my headlamp and laid down on my stomach, crawling into the narrow passage. Immediately, an unspeakable odor filled the air. I gagged a little as the smell of decay assaulted my nostrils. I suddenly realized I was still wearing my dress clothes from work. They were now smeared with dark, oily earth from under the house. I rolled on my side and pulled off my tie. I did my best to wrap the tie around my face to cover my mouth and nose. It didn't work very well, but it was honestly better than nothing. It smelled awful down there. A tangle of daunting thoughts twisted through my mind as I crawled to the other side of the property where I saw the tuft of fur. What am I smelling? It smells like death. Is Murph down there? It can't be Murph. He was fine a couple hours ago. How did they lose my dog? I periodically called out for Murphy through the dusty crawl space. It was hard to see very far ahead due to hanging furnace ducts. There were patches of insulation dropping down here and there as well, obstructing my view. Something I noticed which struck me as odd were the things down there. I saw a beat-up red wagon like a radio flyer pushed into a corner. There was a golf club bent into a U shape, and next to it was a badly stained doll in a red frilly dress. I saw a wooden comb and a rusty pair of scissors, too. Strange to see so many old possessions just lying around under my house. I finally reached the back corner of the crawl space, pushing a heap of insulation aside, and I saw what I was looking for. Murph's collar was laying on the ground near the corner, and attached to it was a sizable chunk of golden fur. I snatched up the collar and examined the fur carefully. There was no flesh or blood attached, just a pile of fur. The collar was still buckled. It just didn't make any sense. Clutching the collar, I crawled out. When I got back into the house, I peeled off my dirty clothes and threw them into the laundry room. I checked my phone on the kitchen counter and saw there were 3 voicemails from the veterinary clinic. A text from my dad and a notification from the GPS app. Pouring myself another whiskey, I played the first voicemail from the vet on speakerphone. This is Kim from the Willamette Falls Veterinary Clinic. Our deepest apologies for the incident today. Please understand we have protocols in place for unexpected events like this. I know it's hard, but we would like to go over some legal documents, and we'd like to ask you to read and sign. Irritated, I shut off the voicemail. My head was spinning and I couldn't think straight. I checked the text from my dad. Hey bud, just checking in. You get that vacation yet? I had the urge to cry and I fought it back. I don't remember exactly when I went to bed. I do remember finishing off the bottle of whiskey at some point. I suppose getting hammered didn't do much to steady my spinning head, but I didn't care. I was exhausted and filled with worry for my dog. It was just easier to fall into the bottle and forget my problems. Now, I was awoken by a sound in the kitchen and I sat up in bed. God, my mouth tasted like I'd swallowed sour milk. I nearly gagged with disgust. It was almost enough to distract me from my splitting headache. Just then, the sound again. The scratching from the kitchen. Slow, deliberate scratching on the floor. Someone in the house? I strained to hear more. And then, a shape came into view at the end of the hallway leading to my bedroom. It was 30 feet away or so, and in the dark, but I could tell it was too small to be a person. The shape moved very slowly and glided along as if it were on the surface of a pool or something. I instinctively pushed myself back in my bed until I was pressed against the headboard. The shape moved steadily towards my room. As it passed into the doorway, it was finally illuminated by the slice of light coming through my window. It was Murphy. Well, sort of. I recognized what looked like my dog, but its face was wrong somehow. That same awful smile from before, its lips twisted back to show its teeth. Murphy's eyes bulged like black marbles in his head, threatening to pop out on the floor and roll away. His fur was blotchy and matted down in places, wet with some unidentifiable liquid. He glided forward slowly like he was stuck in slow motion. As he moved, his joints bent unnaturally like a spider's legs, tapping gently on the hardwood floor. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed in place. Murphy reached the foot of my bed, and silently his front paws clamped down on the frame. He hoisted himself up so he was eye level with me. His tongue bobbed uselessly from his slack mouth, and something dark oozed from his mouth and onto my blankets. I could smell his breath. It smelled like decay. That smell from the crawl space. A low, growling moan crawled up from the depths of Murphy's foul-smelling maw. My vision blurred. I felt myself slipping from consciousness, and I blacked out. I awoke to gentle daylight the next morning. It still felt as if my head had made friends with a sledgehammer at some point in the night. Every swallow was like sandpaper. I rolled out of bed and shuffled into the kitchen. The empty whiskey bottle sat on the counter proudly, as if to take credit for my malaise. Groaning loudly, I swallowed some ibuprofen with water and turned on the coffee machine. Outside, chickadees excitedly serenaded each other in the morning light. And then I remembered it. That thing that came to my room last night. What the Christ was that? A nightmare? I found my phone on the counter and squinted at the screen. 2 voicemails left from the veterinary clinic. I listened to the first one. It sounded like the receptionist. "This is Kim again from the veterinary clinic. We may have information regarding the whereabouts of your dog, Murphy. Please give us a call as soon as possible. Again, we understand this is a difficult time, and we would ask that you come back to the office to read over and sign our legal disclaimers. Thank you." I swallowed hard and skipped to the final voicemail. This time, it was a man's voice. "This is James from the veterinary clinic. Your dog, Murphy, has returned to the clinic, and we have him safe and sound. Please come in as soon as possible so we can discharge him to you. You don't need to call ahead. Just come in." I blinked in disbelief. The coffee maker sputtered softly. I got dressed as quickly as I could and ran to my car. I was halfway to the clinic when I realized I was still wearing my slippers. Anxiety pricked my chest as I pulled into the parking lot. I caught a glimpse of my face in the mirror as I rolled into the closest parking spot. Well, I looked like hell. I probably didn't smell great either. I hadn't showered since before work yesterday. Oh, shit. Work. They'd be wondering why I wasn't in the office. I would have started an hour ago. Strangely, I didn't care. I just wanted to get Murphy back. The real Murphy. Sure enough, Murphy had reappeared at the clinic. He was found locked in the same kennel he'd been in when he disappeared. Another dog was locked in the kennel when Murphy reappeared, so they were locked in the same cage together. Where had he gone? Nobody could tell. I signed some legal documents and a waiver, and then we left the clinic together. On the way home, Murphy stuck his head out of the window and squinted into the wind. He just looked so happy and, well, normal. My mind loosened a bit, and I began to feel as if things might actually go back to being normal now. At home, I threw my shoes into the basket behind the door. Murphy trotted into the house behind me. He walked over to his bowl next to the garage and started lapping up water. I hung my keys on the hook by the hallway. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and I poured myself a cup and sat at the table, listening to the gentle sound of Murphy drinking. What was that thing in my house last night? I thought. One thing I'm sure of. It wasn't my dog.